Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into silk robes, tiptoeing past scroll-covered desks, and entering a world where even feeding a panda required imperial approval. You're standing in the shadow of the Forbidden City, and the scent of incense mixes with the sound of distant bells. You're not sneaking into a treasure vault or a secret council meeting. Nope. You're here for something far stranger, the Ming Dynasty's zoo permit office. This is where elephants needed licenses, peacocks were political currency, and yes, there was actual paperwork for monkeys. You probably won't survive this if you hate bureaucracy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm always curious where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the northern corridors of the Imperial compound, past lacquered doors and stone lions, until you reach a courtyard that smells faintly of bamboo, ink, and something that might be tiger breath. A carved wooden sign reads, Department of Imperial Beasts and Creatures of Tribute. You blink. Yes, that's the real name. This is the office responsible for managing the Emperor's private menagerie. And probably you forgot to file Form 27B, temporary relocation of a celestial grade crane. The Ming Dynasty, reigning from 1368 to 1644, was not exactly chill about animals, especially not the ones in the Emperor's zoo. This wasn't a some cages and a few zookeepers situation. No, the Imperial Zoo, sometimes called the Shoshoyuan, or Garden of Longevity and Beasts, was a serious, sprawling affair. Think of it as a cross between a modern zoo, a diplomatic reception center, and a status symbol so powerful it needed its own filing cabinet. The Emperor's collection included elephants from Siam, giraffes from Africa via a very confused journey through India, peacocks, cranes, tigers, leopards, and even the occasional dragon lizard, probably a Komodo, and none of these animals just showed up. Each one required permits, documentation, and sometimes astrological consultation. Historians still argue whether the bureaucratic obsession was about control, symbolism, or just the Ming love of paperwork. So back to your Form 27B. You're trying to move one of the Emperor's sacred cranes. Yes, the kind that's supposed to symbolize immortality, from the inner garden to the pavilion of celestial wind. Why? Because it keeps pooping on the scrolls in the astronomy lab. But you can't just pick it up and walk it across the courtyard. First, you need clearance from the Ministry of Rites, which handles all things ceremonial. Then you get it stamped by the Court of Imperial Studs, a name that sounds way cooler than it is. They're the ones who manage animals and livestock. Finally, a eunuch supervisor from the inner court has to approve the route. The crane, naturally, must be escorted by 2 handlers, a scribe, and a small boy with a silk parasol. You wonder if the crane has a better benefits package than you. The process takes 3 days, 6 red stamps, and 1 apology letter written in poetic couplets. You stand in line behind a man arguing that his peacock's plumage has faded because the astrology department put it in the wrong wing orientation. The clerk behind the counter doesn't look up. Did you file the celestial wind alignment form? He drones. The man sighs. No. The peacock sneezes. You make a mental note. Never forget the celestial alignment form. One mainstream historical fact here. The Ming emperors used their zoos not just for personal amusement, but for political theater. Foreign dignitaries were often paraded through the animal gardens as a way to show off the dynasty's power and reach. Seeing a giraffe in Beijing in 1414 was like seeing a spaceship land in your backyard today. It said, look how far our influence extends. But here's the fringe tidbit. Some animals were classified not as living beings, but as living artifacts. That meant they were registered like priceless artworks, complete with inventory tags and storage instructions. The giraffe, for instance, was once labeled as a kulin, a mythical creature symbolizing peace and prosperity. Never mind that it was clearly just a very tall, confused herbivore with a long neck and no idea what was going on. You finally reach the front of the line. The clerk looks at your form, squints, and says, you forgot the crimson ribbon mark. You stare at him. What? He points to a tiny box at the bottom of the form labeled, for use with seasonal transfers only. You sigh. That box requires a seal from the Office of Harmonious Climate, which may or may not exist. You remember hearing that the office was dissolved in 1423, but then quietly reopened in 1448 because a snow leopard didn't like the humidity. You offer the clerk a candied plum as a bribe. He raises an eyebrow but accepts it. Fine, he mutters, and stamps the form. Somewhere in the courtyard, a crane lets out a dignified honk. You're cleared. As you step outside, you notice a wall covered in carved plaques, each one a record of a successful animal transfer. Some are written in gold ink, others in tiny characters so cramped they look like a crossword puzzle. There's one commemorating the relocation of a white tiger to the Pavilion of Moonlight. Another marks the first time a Siamese elephant bathed in the Jade Pond. Each plaque is a story, a memory, and, more importantly, a legal record. Historians still argue whether these plaques were meant to honor the animals or simply to protect the bureaucrats from future blame. See, it's documented. Might be the world's oldest excuse. You return to your quarters that night, exhausted. You've moved a crane, bribed a clerk, and learned more about seasonal humidity permits than you ever wanted to know. But the crane is happy, the emperor is pleased, and you, well, you've got ink stains on your robe and a growing suspicion that the parrot in the next room is spying on you. Tomorrow, you'll file a Form 82J, request for avian surveillance clarification. But tonight, you rest. You wake up to the sound of a gong echoing softly across the palace grounds, followed by the unmistakable squawk of a very entitled parrot. The sky outside is painted in early dawn pastels, pale pinks and silvery blues, and the air smells of ink, steamed rice, and something vaguely feline. You stretch, roll out of your cot, and begin preparing for another glorious day in the least glamorous corner of the Ming Court, the Imperial Animal Permit Office. Today's assignment: you've been summoned to the Seal Hall, the grand chamber where all official animal permits are finalized with a crimson-red stamp known as the Dragon Seal. Just hearing the name makes your shoulders tense. The Dragon Seal is no joke. It's a literal carved jade block stored under lock and key, and used only for the most sacred of authorizations, including the arrival of new animals into the Imperial Zoo. Without it, no beast crosses the palace threshold. Outside the seal hold, you find a line already forming. A man in fur-trimmed robes is nervously clutching a cage containing what looks like a very annoyed golden pheasant. Another has a scroll listing the dimensions of a wooden giraffe crate, which he insists must be blessed before unloading. You're holding a thin bamboo folder with your own task: to observe and verify the arrival of 2 white peacocks from Annam. They've been gifted to the emperor by a regional governor, hoping to curry favor, or at least distract the court from a rice tax scandal. As the sun rises, a eunuch official appears, dramatically unrolling a red silk scroll. All those seeking the Dragon Seal present your cases. He intones, as if announcing a royal duel. You step forward, trying to look competent. He eyes your paperwork, then gestures for you to enter. Inside the seal hall, the air is thick with incense and quiet tension. Everything here is taken seriously. The walls are lined with shelves holding animal permits dating back over 100 years. They're organized not by date, but by zoological classification and celestial significance. Because of course they are, somewhere between horned creatures of the southern hemisphere and avian heralds of the vermilion phoenix. Your peacocks must be processed. You hand over your scroll, and a clerk begins the ritual of cross-referencing. First, the bird's feathers are inspected for color purity. Then their calls are tested. Yes, tested, against a recorded description from a 14th century ornithological scroll. Finally, their transport crates are examined for symbolic carvings. One crate bears a lotus, the other, unfortunately, has a chrysanthemum, which is only appropriate for funerals. The clerk frowns. You may need to repaint that, he says without looking up. You nod, trying not to groan. One mainstream historical fact here: during the Ming Dynasty, certain animals were believed to carry cosmic importance. Their presence wasn't just for decoration. They balanced the energies of the palace. Peacocks, in particular, were thought to ward off evil and bring clarity of thought. Naturally, this meant that their documentation had to be flawless. A missing feather could lead to celestial imbalance. Or worse, a bad poetry session in the emperor's study. And here's your quirky tidbit: the dragon seal itself had to be warmed by human breath before use. It was believed that this act imbued the stamp with life force, called ki. So yes, before stamping the form, a senior official literally huffs on the jade block, like he's fogging up a mirror. It's not dignified, but it's tradition. You watch as the official lifts the heavy seal, breathes softly across its surface, then presses it onto the smooth rice paper. A deep red impression blooms across the permit like a blood moon rising. The peacocks are now officially imperial property. But just as you're about to leave, a commotion erupts outside. A messenger bursts in breathless. A shipment of macaques has arrived from Yunnan. He announces, but they lack proper classification seals. Gasps ripple through the room. Improperly sealed monkeys. That's a disaster waiting to happen. You're dispatched immediately to the inspection gate. There, amid squawking birds and confused couriers, you find a trio of wooden cages holding 6 wide-eyed macaques. The courier insists they're peaceful, scholarly types, which you know is a lie just from the way one monkey is gnawing on a stolen ink brush. The real problem is that the Ministry of Works approved their transport, by mistake. Animal classification falls under the Court of Imperial Entertainments, which has a whole separate seal for primates. Without it, the macaques can't be legally housed, fed, or even named. You sigh. This is going to take all morning. Historians still argue whether the Ming system of overlapping bureaucracies was designed for efficiency or confusion. Some say it was a holdover from earlier dynasties. Others believe it was a clever way for the emperor to prevent any one department from gaining too much power. Either way, the result was the same total administrative chaos, especially when it came to animals. You spend the next hour running between departments, trying to track down someone with a simian classification stamp. The first office sends you to the second. The second claims they're out of ink. The third accidentally gives you a small-hoofed creature seal, which you discover only after someone notices the monkeys have been officially declared goats. Eventually, you find an elderly records officer who agrees to stamp the forms correctly, in exchange for a song. Apparently, he believes monkeys respond better when their paperwork is chanted in verse. You mumble out a shaky haiku about bananas and harmony. He nods solemnly and completes the forms. By sunset, the macaques are finally escorted to their courtyard. You return to your quarters, exhausted, smelling faintly of monkey spit and seal wax. You flop onto your mat and stare at the ceiling. Somewhere in the palace, a leopard is being fitted for ceremonial armor. Tomorrow, you'll probably have to file a request for claw sheath adjustment. But for now, you sleep. You wake up to the distant clang of a bronze bell and the unmistakable sound of something large splashing in water, probably the elephant again. As you rub your eyes and reach for your robe, a parchment scroll is shoved under your door with the urgency of a palace emergency. You unroll it carefully. The ink is still fresh, and it bears the crimson mark of the Court of Imperial Entertainments. That's never a good sign. The message is short. Report immediately to the zookeeper's registry. Bring ink, brush, and patience. You groan. The zookeeper's registry is not a place for the faint of heart. It's part archive, part animal control center, part psychological test of endurance. And it's where the empire keeps track of who's feeding, cleaning, and, when necessary, negotiating with the emperor's animals. You trudge across the stone courtyard toward the registry, passing a trio of deer nibbling politely at a plum tree. A peacock watches you with judgmental eyes. It knows you forgot to stamp yesterday's feed log. You reach the red lacquered doors and push them open. Inside it smells like wet hay lacquer and old parchment. Shelves line the walls, stacked with bamboo scrolls tied in colored ribbons. Each ribbon color corresponds to an animal category. Red for carnivores, green for herbivores, blue for mystical or uncertain classification. You don't want to know what's in the blue files. At a central desk sits Supervisor Han, the longest-serving official zookeeper in the dynasty. His beard alone has seniority. He's hunched over a scroll with a brush in hand, muttering under his breath about porcupines and unauthorized combing techniques. You bow. He doesn't look up. You're late, he says. You point out that the message only arrived 5 minutes ago. Then you're 5 minutes late, he replies. Classic Han. He waves you over. Today's task: audit the grooming records of the Pavilion of Harmonious Beasts. Some of the handlers have been creative with their reporting. You raise an eyebrow. Creative. He sighs. Yesterday, someone submitted a grooming log for a ski ox. That's not a thing. You take a seat and start sorting through the scrolls. One of them, written in careful calligraphy, details a full bathing ritual for a monkey using persimmon oil and goat hair brushes. Another claims that a leopard requested a jasmine-scented towel. Supervisor Han growls. That leopard is illiterate. Someone's making things up. One mainstream historical fact: the position of imperial zookeeper during the Ming Dynasty was surprisingly prestigious. These weren't just animal feeders. They were scholars, astrologers, and sometimes even poets. Each had to pass a test, not just on anatomy, but on symbolism, etiquette, and even dream interpretation. If a crane flapped its wings strangely, the zookeeper had to determine if it was a sign of bad luck or just indigestion. But here's your quirky tidbit: zookeepers were also required to speak to the animals daily, especially the heavenly beasts, like white deer or golden pheasants. It was believed that animals absorbed the moral quality of their caretakers through tone of voice. So if a tiger got cranky, it might be because its handler had bad chi, or sang off key. As you sift through the scrolls, one catches your eye. It's older, with faded ink and a cracked bamboo spine. It's titled, Record of the Conversational Parrot, Year of the Water Snake. You open it. Inside is a list of full conversations had with a parrot named Master Jing, who apparently gave unsolicited advice to ministers, and once insulted a visiting diplomat from Joseon. Supervisor Han notices you reading and snorts. That bird had more opinions than the entire Ministry of Personnel. You spend the rest of the morning updating grooming logs, cross-checking with feeding schedules, and trying to decipher a scroll written entirely in poetic verse about a pangolin's bath. Supervisor Han finally pushes back from his desk. Enough. Come. We inspect the handlers. You follow him out into the outer gardens, where the pavilion of harmonious beasts stretches under the shade of ginkgo trees. The sun is bright, and the scent of warm straw and animal fur fills the air. A group of handlers is gathered, each holding a different tool: brushes, buckets, a surprisingly large feather fan. Han steps forward and begins his inspection. He asks each handler to recite the 3 virtues of the zookeeper: cleanliness, compassion, and quietude. One mumbles. Another forgets the third. Han frowns. You forgot quietude. That's the one that keeps you from yelling at the peacocks. He moves on to check tools. One handler's brush is missing half its bristles. Another tries to pass off a horse comb as a tiger brush. The tiger knows, Han says ominously. The tiger always knows. Historians still argue whether these intense standards were about animal care or simply about upholding Confucian ideals within every aspect of court life. After all, if the emperor's leopard isn't properly exfoliated, could the empire itself start to crumble? You return to the registry in the late afternoon, your feet sore, your robe covered in something that might be yuck dandruff. Supervisor Han nods approvingly. You didn't faint. That's better than last time. Before you leave, he hands you a scroll. Tomorrow, you'll be shadowing Keeper Lu. She's in charge of the birds. You open the scroll. It's a full schedule of bird-related tasks, including something ominously labeled Emergency Feather Recalibration. You bow, take the scroll, and leave the registry just as the sun begins to dip behind the tiled rooftops. Back in your quarters, you collapse onto your mat. Your dreams that night are filled with talking parrots, suspicious scrolls, and a tiger who demands a specific brand of soap. You wake up unsure whether you're more bureaucrat or zookeeper now. You wake up to the unmistakable crunch of bamboo leaves and the low rumble of some very heavy breathing. Not yours, thankfully, but something much larger and more exotic. As you peek out your window, you see a pair of palace guards escorting what looks like a small parade float draped in silk and tassels. Except it's not a float, it's a tiger, riding in style on a lacquered platform pulled by oxen. Beside it walks a handler in green robes, holding a scroll like it's more dangerous than the actual tiger. You throw on your robe and sandals and rush to the courtyard, where the zookeeper on duty waves you over with a look that says, "Please help me before this tiger eats the paperwork." The tiger, a magnificent golden creature with a tail like a whip and eyes sharper than most ministers, has just arrived from the southern province of Guangxi. It's a gift, or more precisely, a tribute, from a regional governor, and with it comes a full stack of documents: origin certificate, temperament profile, feeding regimen, and, most importantly, the permit for symbolic transfer of loyalty via animal offering, or PSTLO for short. Rolls right off the tongue. You take the scroll from the handler and begin reviewing it. The tiger's name, apparently, is Jade Fang, which sounds like a luxury soap brand or a martial arts champion. The paperwork insists he is Orf noble-bearing, rarely growls, and dislikes cucumbers. You make a note of that last part. There was that one time a panda got a cucumber and caused a bureaucratic nightmare. One mainstream historical fact: in the Ming Dynasty, rare animals were often used as tribute items, a tradition that stretched back centuries. Governors, foreign envoys, and sometimes even ambitious merchants would offer up exotic creatures to demonstrate loyalty, gain favor, or distract the court from less flattering political events happening back home. A tiger wasn't just a gift, it was a statement. Look how powerful we are. And also, please ignore the local tax revolt. But here's the fringe tidbit. Tribute animals were taxed. Yes, taxed. Not in the pay money way, but in bureaucratic value units. A tiger might be worth 15 tribute units, a white deer 9, and a particularly well-behaved crane 4. This didn't just determine how impressive the gift was, it influenced how many honor points the giver earned. Enough points, and you might get promoted. Too few, and people started asking why your giraffe only had one horn. You escort Jade Fang to the Hall of Celestial Beasts, where all new arrivals are quarantined, not for disease, but for symbolic purification. A priest arrives to wave incense over the tiger, who sneezes violently and looks personally offended. A scribe records the sneeze as ominous but non-lethal. Then comes the real challenge, assigning the tiger a symbolic purpose. See, you can't just say, "This is a cool tiger." No, you need to justify its spiritual and political relevance. You open the beast symbol registry, a massive book bound in blackened ox hide, and flip past entries for Phoenix of Rebirth, Turtle of Patience, and Yak of Uncomfortable Truths. Eventually, you land on the right page. Tigers are typically filed under Guardians of Imperial Authority, but can also serve as emblems of fearsome mercy or representations of controlled chaos. You decide to go with Guardian Spirit of the Southern Provinces, since the governor really needs people to stop talking about the rice riots. You submit the scroll to the Bureau of Emblematic Assignments, where an official in a hat the size of a dinner table reviews it, nods solemnly, and stamps it with the red symbol of harmonious intention. That's the good one, the one with the little cloud pattern. Historians still argue whether this process was rooted in actual belief, or was just a very elaborate PR stunt. Some say the court genuinely believed in the symbolic resonance of each animal. Others think it was just a way to keep increasingly creative governors from sending in things like four-legged dragons or mystical pigs. You spend the afternoon overseeing Jade Fang's integration into the Imperial Zoo. He's assigned a private enclosure with a moon gate, a waterfall, and 3 personal attendants. 2 for feeding, 1 for singing lullabies. That last one wasn't your idea, but apparently the Emperor once read a poem about a tiger soothed by music, and now it's policy. Later, a clerk arrives with an animal tribute ledger, requesting that you log the tiger's arrival under the correct tribute bracket. You flip to the current year's list and find that so far, the Emperor has received 1 albino crane, symbol of purity, 2 pangolins, symbol of quiet resilience, 1 ill-tempered yaks, symbol of marital honesty, and now 1 Guangxi tiger, symbol, TBD. You enter Jade Fang's data in careful brushstrokes, species Panthera tigris, gender male, dietary code 3 beast raw meat, occasional goat, no cucumbers, tribute tier gold, symbolic function guardian spirit. You finish the entry with a flourish, then roll up the scroll and seal it with your personal stamp. A modest design of a sleeping fox, because you're not flashy. Just before sunset, a runner from the Office of Ritual Affairs arrives with a curious request. The Emperor wishes to view the tiger tomorrow morning, and would like a short poetic summary of the animal's spiritual aura. You sigh, reach for your brush, and try to write something that sounds both mystical and not too flattering. In case the Emperor's in one of his tiger equals rebellion moods, you end up with this golden flame with silent tread, guardian of dreams unsaid. Through southern storms his gaze is clear, he stalks not prey, but whispered fear. You hand the poem over and hope it lands well. If not, you may need to file a Form 48 QZ. Request for retroactive symbolic reclassification. As the palace gates close for the night, you hear Jade Fang let out a low, echoing growl that reverberates across the garden. The birds go silent. Even the wind seems to pause. You smile. The paperwork is filed, the symbolism is balanced, and no one got eaten. For today at least. You wake up to the sound of clanging bells and harried footsteps echoing down the corridor. Never a good sign. A pang of dread settles in your stomach like a badly wrapped dumpling. You swing open your door and are instantly hit with a rush of voices, shouting over each other. Where's the animal manifest? I told you to stamp the 3rd scroll. The camel's already halfway through the East Pavilion. You pull on your robe and rush into the courtyard, where a caravan of camels is trundling through the garden with all the grace of sleepy ships in a sea of confusion. Their hairy humps sway with each step. and their eyes give off the kind of existential wariness that says, "I didn't ask to be part of your imperial tribute drama." At the front of the caravan walks Director Meng, an official from the Bureau of Tribute Logistics, waving a scroll and gesturing with the urgency of someone whose career is hanging on a camel's tail. "Where is the receiving clerk?" he shouts. "These beasts cannot stand in the sun! They are valuable!" They are probably spiritually aligned with something important. You step forward, bleary-eyed but vaguely qualified. "I'm the clerk," you say. "I think." Meng gives you a look of mixed relief and judgment. "Then come with me. We're about to violate 3 celestial ordinances and at least 7 camel-related statutes." And just like that, you're swept into the surprisingly high-stakes world of tribute beast logistics. One mainstream historical fact during the Ming Dynasty: tribute animals, especially exotic ones like camels, elephants, and giraffes, were delivered as part of diplomatic relations. These animals came from far-off regions like Central Asia and Africa, often traveling for months through deserts, mountains, and bureaucratic hellscapes to reach the imperial court. Their arrival wasn't just about the animals themselves. It was a spectacle, a statement of trade routes, political alliances, and sometimes sheer showmanship. But here's the quirky tidbit. The entire journey was tracked in an enormous bamboo ledger called the Shiashu El-Far, the record of beasts given and received. Each animal had its own entry, complete with travel logs, inspection notes, and even personality summaries written by local officials along the way. You flip through the most recent entries. Camel No. 3 obedient, prefers left turns. Camel No 5 spits at authority figures. Camel No 8 may be reincarnated poet. Avoid loud noises. You've been tasked with verifying each camel's paperwork, ensuring that their 7-part inspection has been properly completed. These include 1. Health certification from the province of origin. 2. Astrological travel clearance. 3. Hump integrity report. 4. Temperament verification. 5. Food compatibility matrix. 6. Symbolic alignment score. 7. Travel permit stamped by no fewer than 3 regional governors. You start with Camel No 2. His scroll is missing the hump integrity report, which is apparently vital because collapsed humps imply collapsed governance. You send a runner to fetch a hump inspector. Yes, that's a real job, while you check the next animal. Camel No 4 has a complete file, but the astrological clearance is for the year of the rooster, not the current year of the rat. You hesitate. Is that bad? Director Meng sighs, already massaging his temples. It means this camel could destabilize the Emperor's chi if he passes the wrong gate at the wrong hour. You look at the sun. It's dangerously close to the hour of the snake, which would make things awkward. Historians still argue whether this astrological micromanagement was genuinely believed or just another layer of imperial theatre. Some scholars think the Ming court used these rituals to maintain order and control over regional officials. If you're busy worrying about whether your camel aligns with Venus, you probably don't have time to rebel. As you scramble to correct the errors, you notice Camel No 7 chewing on one of the inspection scrolls. "No!" you shout, lunging forward. The camel blinks, unimpressed, and swallows the scroll with a finality that says, "Your paperwork is meaningless in the face of digestion." You sigh. Time to file a lost scroll incident report, Form 88C. You scribble "eaten by camel during transfer." Symbolic implications unclear. Recommend spiritual consultation. With only minutes to spare before the Emperor's viewing appointment, you manage to line up all camels in the correct ceremonial order. According to the Tribute Beast Manual, camels must be arranged by hump height, then by spiritual harmony level, and finally by fluffiness quotient, which is subjective but apparently important. You wave over the court of ritual colors, whose job is to assess whether any of the animals clash with the surrounding architecture. One camel is deemed too beige and must be dusted with a light powder of crushed jade pigment to appear more auspicious. Then comes the sniff test. Yes, that's a thing. An official from the Bureau of Fragrant Offerings walks down the line, sniffing each camel to ensure they meet minimum scent standards. This one smells of almonds. Excellent. This one, slightly barnyard, needs a rinse. You look at Director Meng, silently begging for reassurance that this is all, in fact, real. He nods. The Emperor once refused tribute because a yak smelled of melancholy. You believe him. Finally, the camels are ready. The Emperor arrives, flanked by silk-robed attendants and an umbrella bearer who looks like he's regretting his career choices. He approaches the caravan, eyes narrowed, and says nothing for a full minute. Then he turns to you and asks, "Do they kneel?" You blink. "Do they?" Before you can finish, Director Meng claps twice. The handlers tug gently at their leads, and, miraculously, the camels kneel one by one, their legs folding like elegant furniture. The Emperor nods, visibly pleased. "Good," he says. "I dreamed of camels last night. They brought me tea." You smile and bow, scribbling a note to forward that dream to the Bureau of Symbolic Interpretation. As the Emperor departs, you begin the final step, entering the camels into the Imperial Animal Archive under the category Beasts of Far Plains Bearing Allegiance. You list their names, personalities, and feeding preferences, no melon rinds, extra dates. You return to your quarters, utterly spent, with sand in your shoes and the faint scent of camel still clinging to your robe. As you lie in bed, you hear the distant clop of hooves and wonder what tomorrow holds. A crocodile delegation, a peacock rebellion. You'll be ready, probably. You're jolted awake by a loud, metallic clang, followed immediately by the unmistakable sound of cranes arguing. Not the construction kind, of course, but the long-legged, feathered, courtly type. Their piercing cries echo through the palace walls like gossip at a noblewoman's tea party. You sit up, blink a few times, and realize today is Zoo Quota Day, a day feared by clerks, dreaded by zookeepers, and quietly loathed by the animals, who somehow always know what's coming. A scroll is already waiting outside your door, tied delicately with a feather and sealed with the mark of the Ministry of Ceremonial Balance. The message is brief but ominous. Attend the Grand Quota Review. Pavilion of Perched Harmony. Bring records. Prepare to mediate disputes. You groan. Not again. The Pavilion of Perched Harmony is one of the more beautiful spots in the Forbidden City. A tranquil aviary filled with cherry trees, koi ponds, and the constant background noise of birds either mating or plotting coops. But today, it's filled with something far more dangerous than aggressive cranes. Eunuch supervisors and rival bureaucrats, each armed with scrolls, ink brushes, and very strong opinions. One mainstream historical fact. The Ming Dynasty's Imperial Zoo wasn't just a whimsical collection of animals. It was a carefully managed system with strict population quotas. Each species was assigned a spiritual balance number, and exceeding or falling short of that number was believed to throw off the palace's harmony. Cranes, for example, were associated with longevity and divine communication. Too many and you risked celestial arrogance. Too few and the Emperor might start contemplating mortality. Neither was ideal. You arrive just as the meeting begins. A long table stretches across the pavilion, covered in scrolls, ledgers, and an unsettling number of bird feathers. At one end sits Supervisor Lin, who oversees avian affairs with the intensity of someone who's been personally insulted by a goose. At the other end is Eunuch Zhao, who represents the Emperor's inner court and has a reputation for being, how can we put this, particular. Zhao clears his throat. The crane population has exceeded its harmonious threshold by 7. Lin fires back. Their calls have become more synchronized. That suggests divine alignment, not excess. Zhao raises an eyebrow. The Emperor's astrologer disagrees. He says the cranes are giving off cluttered sky energy. You start flipping through your copy of the Avian Balance Ledger, trying to find the last recorded census. There it is, 42 cranes, the sacred number of celestial pathways. But now, 49, you wince. That's 7 cranes too many. Which in Ming numerology translates to interrupted immortality. Never a good omen. The debate gets heated. Lin argues that reducing the crane population would insult the gods. Zhao counters that too many cranes have been interfering with the feng shui of the Pavilion of Enlightened Scrolls. A scroll was ruined by droppings. He says, deadpan. The Emperor was not amused. You're asked to mediate. Lucky you. You propose a temporary relocation strategy, move 5 cranes to the southern retreat in Hangzhou, where they can restore balance to regional qi. The remaining 2 can be designated as symbolic floaters, officially neutral in the balance count, but still around to look majestic. Zhao considers it. Lin grumbles but nods. The motion is accepted, and you're tasked with drafting Form 72FA, graceful reallocation of overrepresented avian entities. But the drama isn't over. As the crane dispute winds down, a new argument flares up over the number of tortoises in the lotus pond. Apparently, someone's been slipping extra tortoises into the enclosure to boost their department's symbolic wisdom quotient. According to the last audit, there were 12, says a junior clerk. Now there are 19. Supervisor Lin glares. Who authorized the additional tortoises? Silence. Then someone mutters, "I heard the Office of Historical Insight sent them." Without a permit. Joe gasps. That's an unauthorized act of metaphysical inflation. You're assigned to investigate. You head to the lotus pond and find the tortoises sunning themselves like tiny sages, blinking slowly at your presence. A keeper shows you a crate marked Wisdom Enhancement Units, addressed from the Office of Historical Insight. No paperwork, no stamps, just a note that reads, "The Emperor seemed forgetful lately." You have to file a contraband creature report, including a philosophical evaluation of whether the tortoises have already altered the pond's symbolic balance. You consult the Manual of Amphibious Resonance and discover that tortoises, once introduced to water features, begin affecting the flow of memory within 2 hours. You check your timepiece. It's been 3. Oops. You recommend that 7 tortoises be relocated to the Library of Subtle Thoughts, where their energy can be better absorbed by unread scrolls. It's approved, but not before you have to sit through a lecture on the spiritual conductivity of turtle shells. Historians still argue whether these quota battles were serious metaphysical concerns or just elaborate turf wars between departments. Some claim it was all about preserving cosmic order. Others suspect it was a power game, with different offices inflating their animal rosters to gain more influence, or better lunches. Before the meeting can end, yet another scroll is unrolled. This time, it's a complaint from the Ministry of Provisions. Apparently, the Crane Department has been requesting double rations of ginseng root, claiming it's necessary for feather vibrancy. Food budgets are tight, and the ministry wants answers. Zhao sighs. We'll need to audit their diets. You're tasked with creating a new ledger, consumption records for divine beaked creatures. It's your 3rd ledger this week, and your brush hand is starting to cramp. As the sun begins to set, the meeting finally adjourns. Cranes squawk overhead, oblivious to the fact that their existence is balanced on a knife edge of bureaucracy and symbolism. You wonder if they know. You suspect they do. You return to your quarters, pockets filled with loose feathers, your mind swirling with numbers, symbols, and the image of tortoises slowly destabilizing memory flows. You fall asleep mid-scroll, dreaming of a world where birds file their own paperwork and nobody argues over ginseng. You wake up to silence, a dangerous thing in the Imperial Zoo. Silence means something's off. Silence means something's missing. You sit up slowly, listening for the usual morning sounds: the chittering of monkeys, the flapping of cranes, the deep snort of a napping tiger. But today, nothing. Then a knock at your door, followed by the unmistakable voice of Supervisor Han, low and grave. "We've got a situation," he says. "Something's died." You blink. Something. He hands you a scroll. "One parrot. Died during the night. Proceed to the Office of Deceased Creatures for audit processing." You stare at the note. There's an office for dead animals. Of course there is. You throw on your robe and follow Han through the misty morning corridors, your sandals slapping softly against the brick. You pass the usual signs: Feeding Pavilion, Registry of Symbolic Creatures, Incense for Beasts Department, until you reach a discreet wooden door marked only with a tiny, hand-painted character, Wonk Deeth. Inside, you find a small, windowless room filled with scrolls, reed mats, and the faint smell of incense and birdseed. At the center sits Archivist Shu, a woman with a serene expression and a brush so finely carved it could probably sign treaties on its own. She gestures to a perch where the parrot, now motionless, feathers still vivid, is laid out like a fallen court official. You half expect someone to deliver a eulogy. "Species?" she asks. "Blue-rumped parrot," you say, consulting your notes. "Originally from the Burma delegation. Arrived 3 years ago. Cause of death," you hesitate. "Unknown. No wounds, no signs of distress. Just stop talking." Archivist Shu nods solemnly. "We'll need to determine whether it was a natural passing or a symbolic expiration." You blink. "What's the difference?" She unrolls a scroll titled Metaphysical Implications of Avian Departures and begins to explain. A natural passing means the bird died of age, illness, or, heaven forbid, boredom. A symbolic expiration, however, occurs when the animal's death represents something larger, a shift in palace energy, a forewarning, or a cosmic realignment. You glance nervously at the parrot. It looks peaceful. But then again, so do most omens before they become problems. One mainstream historical fact: Ming Dynasty record-keeping was so meticulous that even the deaths of palace animals were logged with the same care as the deaths of minor officials. There were entire scrolls dedicated to animal obituaries, complete with symbolic interpretations, ritual responses, and dietary investigations in case the death was linked to spoiled food. But here's the quirky tidbit: animals who died while in imperial service had to be posthumously assessed for loyalty. Yes, loyalty. If an animal was deemed to have served faithfully, it might be buried in the garden of harmonious departures. If not, well, it went to the compost pile behind the llama enclosure. You do not want to end your days behind the llamas. Archivist Shu begins the audit. You assist her in reviewing the parrot's records. Feeding log complete. Grooming schedule. Missed one appointment last month. Verbal output average of 212 words per day. Last known phrase, don't trust the man with the fan. You stare at that last line. Is that a prophecy? Shu raises an eyebrow. Could be. Or just gossip. You make a note: possible seditious utterance. Investigate fan ownership among staff. The next step is the feather count. A scribe arrives to carefully pluck and catalogue the fallen feathers. 27 primaries, 8 secondaries, 3 decorative. He frowns. One is missing. You look around. Could it have been stolen? A murmur runs through the room. A missing feather isn't just a grooming issue. If someone took it, it could be used in rituals, spells, or worse, unauthorized scroll embellishment. You file an immediate feather theft incident report, Form 33K, and seal it with your personal stamp. A runner is dispatched to interrogate the calligraphy department. Then comes the disposition decision. Archivist Shu flips through the parrot's assessment records. Hay once interrupted a minister's speech by repeating the phrase "empty words, empty head" for 6 minutes straight, she notes. That's either treason or insight. You suggest a middle path: quiet recognition burial, a category reserved for animals that were probably loyal, but also probably a bit too clever. Shu agrees. Prepare the burial scroll. You carefully write the bird's obituary. Here lies whispering breeze, feathered envoy, mimic of minds. He spoke too much, or perhaps just enough. Now silence is his final word. You sign it, roll it, and stamp it. Then seal it inside a miniature scroll case, which is placed beneath the parrot's wing. A small funeral procession is arranged. You, Shu, the scribe, and one confused monkey, who wandered in and refused to leave, accompany the body to the garden of harmonious departures. There, under a ginkgo tree, the parrot is buried with a sprinkle of millet and a single incense stick. The monkey salutes. You think it's a coincidence. You hope it is. As you return to the office, a messenger hands you a new scroll. It reads, "Conduct audit of all avian speech logs. Report any repeated phrases indicating unrest, rebellion, or weather complaints." You sigh. Time to re-listen to weeks of parrot chatter, crow squawks, and the occasional goose monologue. Historians still argue whether the palace truly believed in animal prophecies, or if it was just another way to shift blame. The parrot said it was, allegedly, once used as a defense in a court scandal. It didn't work. You spend the rest of the afternoon cross-checking speech records. One parrot seems to have developed a deep hatred for fishmongers. Another keeps saying, "The moon weeps for fools," which, if you're honest, sounds like something your supervisor would say during lunch. You jot notes, flag patterns, and sigh deeply as the sun begins to set. Back in your quarters, you light a single candle and stare at the scribbled phrase, "Don't trust the man with the fan." You whisper it once, just to hear it out loud. The candle flickers. You blow it out. You wake up with a start, heart pounding. There's a thumping at your door, fast, rhythmic, and definitely not a normal knock. You crack it open to find a junior courier, panting and wide-eyed, holding a scroll sealed in black lacquer. "Emergency," he says. "High priority, classified, top secret." You squint. It's about. He leans in and whispers, "Unauthorized pangolin transport." You blink. "Pangolins." He nods gravely. "Smuggled. No papers, no permits, no celestial alignment chart. They've gone completely off the grid." You sigh, already pulling on your robe. Of all the animals to trigger a bureaucratic crisis, you didn't expect pangolins. Quiet, shy, armor-plated creatures, shaped like a pine cone having a bad day. But in the world of the Ming Imperial Zoo, even a rogue pangolin could cause spiritual imbalance, and worse, paperwork chaos. You follow the courier through the palace corridors to the Office of Zoological Integrity, a stone-walled chamber that smells faintly of sandalwood and suspicion. Inside, 3 officials are gathered around a table, whispering over a series of scrolls and a small pile of what appear to be pangolin scales. "Where were they found?" you ask. "Near the plum blossom gate." replies one official. In a rickshaw full of ceremonial drums. You raise an eyebrow. Creative. They hand you the initial report: 2 adult pangolins, no identification tags, no tribute stamps, and no feeding records. Worse, there's evidence that this isn't an isolated incident. A black market pangolin ring might be operating inside the palace. One mainstream historical fact. During the Ming Dynasty, pangolins were considered rare and auspicious creatures, sometimes associated with earth energy and silent wisdom. Their scales were believed by some to have medicinal or even mystical properties. As a result, pangolins were both coveted and tightly regulated. Any creature brought into the imperial menagerie had to be accounted for, and the transportation of animals without a permit was a serious offense, on par with forging imperial documents or misusing ceremonial hats. But here's the quirky tidbit. The smugglers in this case apparently forged a permit, using a monkey's feeding schedule as the base document. They scratched out banana rations and wrote in scale maintenance. The forgery was only discovered because the monkey in question was extremely offended to be reassigned to the insectivorous category. You're tasked with leading the investigation. First step: trace the route. You head down to the logistical entry pavilion, where all animal arrivals are logged by hour handler and horoscope. After an hour of cross-referencing, you find a suspicious gap, a 2-hour window where no entries were recorded, but multiple crates were moved through the back gate. You interview the gatekeeper, a man named Old Wu, who's been on duty since before you were born and has the memory of a particularly stubborn elephant. Did you see anyone move a crate labeled musical instruments? He nods slowly. Yup. Had a drum painted on the side. Was it thumping? He shrugs. Could have been a tune. Could have been a tale. You send a runner to the Court of Musical Affairs, just in case someone actually ordered a crate of percussion pangolins. Meanwhile, you inspect the animals themselves. The pangolins are currently being held in a shaded courtyard under guard. They're curled into tight little balls, giving off the air of 2 creatures who are deeply unimpressed by the Empire's security protocols. One of them uncurls slightly and flicks its tongue at you. You check for tattoos, brands, or any kind of identification marker. Nothing. Then you notice something odd. Each pangolin has a tiny red thread tied around its left hind leg. Not a common practice. You consult the registry of animal markings, which confirms your suspicion. Red thread was a known smuggler's marker, used to identify animals for sale to underground collectors or alchemical researchers. Historians still argue whether these underground animal rings were widespread, or just the invention of bored clerks trying to spice up their reports. Some believe rogue scholars used smuggled creatures for forbidden experiments, mixing animal parts with ink, herbs, or mercury to create spiritual enhancements. Others think it was just about money. Pangolins were rare, and rarity always has a price. You file a Level 4 violation report, unauthorized animal entry with potential symbolic impact, and attach it to your investigation scroll. Now comes the hard part: finding the source. Back in the Office of Zoological Integrity, a new clue arrives. A confiscated letter, intercepted by a suspiciously literate cat. Long story. It's addressed to the Scaled Collector, and reads tour the shipment has arrived. 2 units. Unregistered. Quiet as ever. The fox says the price has doubled since the last moon. You tap the scroll. The fox, codename, says Shu, who's joined the investigation. There's a rumor about a rogue eunuch who deals in exotic creatures. No one knows his real name, but he leaves fox paw prints in the margins of fake permits. You open the pangolin file again, and there it is. A tiny paw print, barely visible, scratched into the corner of the page. You spend the rest of the day backtracking through permit archives, matching ink samples, and interrogating scribes. One finally cracks under the pressure of mild eye contact and admits to stamping a suspicious scroll in exchange for a jar of candied plums. You confiscate the plums for evidence, and maybe a snack, and the trail leads to the Department of Decorative Scrolls, where permits are often copied for display purposes. There, you find a stash of forged animal permits, hidden behind a false panel in the calligraphy cabinet. Each one bears the fox paw print. You file your final report, complete with a list of known forgers, suspected animal targets, and a strongly worded recommendation that the Emperor consider random inspections of musical shipments. The rogue pangolins are given emergency permits and reclassified as symbolic guardians of earthly secrets, a category created just this morning to keep them from being removed. And you, You're awarded a commendation for bureaucratic vigilance, which comes with absolutely no monetary reward, but does allow you to sit one row closer to the window during scroll review sessions. As night falls, you return to your quarters. The pangolins are safe. The fox is still at large. And tomorrow, you'll probably be asked to verify the authenticity of a phoenix feather. You drift off to sleep, dreaming of armored pinecones, whispering state secrets in the moonlight. You're barely awake when a scroll is dropped on your face. Not handed gently. Not placed neatly by your pillow. Dropped. On your face. You blink against the early morning light, fumble for the scroll, and unroll it with crusty eyes. The seal is gold and shaped like a crescent moon over a tortoise shell, which can only mean one thing. The Bureau of Celestial Timing is calling. You groan. These are the people who once delayed the lion's feeding time because Mercury was in an unfavorable house. You brace yourself for another day of mystical math, animal astrology, and debates about whether or not elephants should be allowed to bathe during lunar eclipses. You arrive at the Bureau's office, a circular tower lined with astrological charts, bronze instruments, and stressed-out astronomers muttering things like, "Mars is drunk again." A robed official greets you with a bow that's just a little too slow. "Welcome," he says. "We're preparing the animal importation star chart for the next lunar cycle. Your expertise is needed." "My expertise in permit timing," he says, as if that explains anything. "You'll help determine which animals are cosmically permitted to enter the palace during which windows." You follow him into the central chamber. A massive zodiac wheel is etched into the floor. Scrolls flutter from the ceiling like celestial laundry. At the center is a list of pending animal arrivals, each tagged with a proposed date, time, and corresponding star cluster. At the top of the list, 1 fox from Hunan, 2 parrots from Annan, 1 otter, unconfirmed origin, 1 albino deer urgent. You're told the albino deer must be processed before the next full moon, or its lunarescence will become unstable. You're not sure what that means, but it sounds messy. One mainstream historical fact. Astrology played a surprisingly central role in Ming Dynasty decision-making, especially at court. Everything from military campaigns to birthday celebrations was timed according to the stars. And yes, that extended to zoo logistics. Certain animals could only be introduced during specific lunar alignments to avoid energy clashes or symbolic disharmony. But here's the quirky tidbit. There was a forbidden pairing chart that dictated which animals could not arrive within the same 10-day cycle. Parrots and foxes, for example, were considered celestial opposites. Legend had it that introducing both during a waning gibbous moon would cause political squabbling, unexplained poetry outbursts, or worse, melancholy in the emperor's dreams. You look at the list again. Parrots and foxes, both scheduled for the same day. You point this out. The astrologer gasps. One must adjust immediately. A team of scribes rushes to redraw the schedule. The fox is bumped to the ire of the horse 3 days later, and must now enter through the western gate of balanced intentions to mitigate any residual tension. You're asked to file a temporal permit adjustment scroll, Form 12T, and submit it to the Office of Bureaucratic Harmony. That office is located 3 floors up, behind the Sundial Archive, and is staffed exclusively by people who measure time in breaths per incense stick. You arrive, announce the adjustment, and are handed a bowl of rice. "You must eat this," the clerk says. "It calibrates your cue before you sign the scroll." You do it. It's undercooked. You sign anyway. Back downstairs, the astrologers are now debating whether the otter should be allowed to enter at all. Water creatures during a fire moon. One whispers, "That's how dynasties fall." You suggest placing the otter in a neutral holding pond until a more favorable constellation appears. This is accepted, and you're asked to file a provisional celestial containment approval, Form ABLB, for beast, L for lunar sensitive. You're halfway through the form when you spot a mistake in the deer's entry. Its arrival is listed for the 17th day of the waxing moon, but the astrologer has circled the wrong moon phase entirely. That would place the deer's entry during a celestial reversal window, which, according to the handbook, is when white-furred animals may absorb court anxiety and manifest it as disruptive tail behavior. You raise the issue. The astrologer pales. We cannot risk tail behavior. The schedule is adjusted again. Historians still argue whether these astrological precautions were sincerely believed or simply a way to control the flow of influence in the court. Some officials use the star charts to delay rivals' requests or push their own through during auspicious windows. In other words, a well-timed astrology reading could make or break a career, or the arrival of a very cranky otter. By mid-afternoon, you've reviewed 23 celestial windows, signed off on 6 reclassifications, and filed more forms than you care to count. You've memorized the table of planetary animal affinities, which includes such gems as Mars tigers, hawks, and ambitious goats, Venus peacocks, deer, and romantic cranes, Saturn tortoises, old monkeys, and anything that bites without warning. You're about to leave when a new emergency scroll arrives. A giraffe is en route, yes, another one, and its arrival time has been calculated based on Persian astrology, not Chinese. A diplomat from the West insisted that the giraffe must arrive under the House of Tall Blessings, which loosely translates to just after sunrise, during the hour of extended necks. You're asked to reconcile the two systems. You look at both charts, then suggest a compromise. The giraffe may arrive at dawn, but only if its shadow falls in the direction of the palace kitchens, symbolizing nourishment and upward growth. The astrologers nod solemnly, as if you've just solved a centuries-old debate. You file Form 77SN, symbolic neck exceptions, and stamp it with your new temporal authority seal, which features a clock balanced on a tiger's back. By the time you return to your quarters, the stars are out. You lie on your mat, eyes scanning the constellations. Somewhere up there, a monkey is probably arguing with a tortoise over who gets to represent Saturn. You dream of star charts folding into cranes, of giraffes reciting poetry, and of an otter swimming in a perfectly balanced moonlit pond. Everything, for now, is in alignment. You wake up to the sound of a gong that's far too enthusiastic for the hour, followed by a voice shouting, "Urgent appeal," from the Peacock Division. You groan. The peacocks never send casual messages. If they've filed an appeal, it's either about perch conditions, mirror access, or, heaven help you, artistic recognition grievances. You shuffle to the door, where a junior scribe practically throws a scroll into your hands and backs away like it might explode. You unroll it and immediately notice something strange. It's a poem, not a form, not a petition in bureaucratic prose. A full poem, complete with rhymes, dramatic metaphors, and a suspicious amount of feather imagery. The title reads Tor, to whom it may concern, a plea for dignity, Tor from Imperial Peacock No. 6, Pavilion of Radiant Plumage. You read the first lines aloud. I, whose tail fans like the rising sun, have been caged too long, my joy undone. No mirror greets my morning call, no shade protects when raindrops fall. You squint. Is this a joke? You bring the scroll to Supervisor Han, who's already 2 cups into his morning tea and shaking his head before you even speak. Another poetic permit, he mutters. That's the 3rd this month. You blink. This happens often. Oh yes, he says. Ever since the Emperor praised that one goose for its elegant silence. The animals think creative writing carries more weight than proper paperwork. Apparently, peacocks in the Forbidden City are not just decorative. They're divers with diplomatic ambitions. And when they feel their accommodations are lacking, they compose appeals in verse. These must be submitted, reviewed, and, if found sufficiently poetic, entered into the Bureau of Poetic Petitions, a real office staffed by retired scholars who now specialize in interpreting bird verse. One mainstream historical fact. Certain animals in the Ming court were granted semi-symbolic personhood, meaning they could be the subject of petitions, tribute, and appeals. While they didn't exactly hold legal rights, they were often treated as spokes creatures for broader symbolic concepts. A well-placed appeal on behalf of a peacock could represent a request for more court elegance, or even a subtle jab at fading imperial glory. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some of these appeals were ghost-written by scribes and low-level clerks. It became something of a game. Who could write the most compelling, most moving animal complaint? A particularly eloquent yak once got new straw bedding and a personal cooling attendant. You suspect the same scribe is behind this peacock's latest masterpiece. You're assigned to investigate whether Peacock No. 6 grievances are valid, or simply the result of an overactive imagination and a flair for drama. You head to the Pavilion of Radiant Plumage, a lush garden filled with ornamental trees, shallow pools, and a suspicious number of broken mirrors. No. 6 is easy to spot. He's the one standing on a carved pedestal, tail feathers fully fanned, glaring at you like you owe him rent. You approach cautiously. He lets out a mournful honk. His keeper, Mistress Lion, offers you an apologetic bow. He's been like this all week. Ever since the Emperor walked past without commenting on his plumage. You nod. A bruised ego. She gestures to the broken mirror shards. He smashed the last one himself. Then refused to eat until I read him a poem. You sigh. Do you still have that poem? She produces a scroll from her sleeve. It's titled, Reflections in a Shattered Pool. You begin the inspection. The shade cloth is indeed torn. The usual daily bath was skipped last Tuesday due to a palace-wide plumbing issue. And the peacock's perch has been moved slightly, now facing away from the morning sun. Symbolically, Lion says, believes he's been demoted. You return to the Office of Poetic Petitions, where a panel of 3 retired scholars sits beneath a banner that reads, Truth wears many feathers. You present the original poem along with your findings. The scholars read it in silence, stroking their beards and murmuring about internal rhyme, an emotional meter. One finally declares, this is the strongest avian appeal we've read since the Goose Sonnet of 1439. The verdict valid petition. You're instructed to file a restorative symbolism order, Form 42AV avian version, which includes compensation in the form of 2 new mirrors, a fresh perch facing east, and a reading of his poem in the Emperor's private tea garden. Yes, the head scholar says. The words must be heard. You ask, must it be read to the Emperor? He shakes his head, to the coy. They're very cultured. You return to the pavilion with the good news. Mistress Lion beams. Peacock note. 6 lets out a dignified trill and flutters his wings, in what you assume is satisfaction. You make arrangements for the poem reading. A scribe is selected to perform it in front of the koi pond the next morning. You attend, of course, just to make sure protocol is followed. The koi gather. The scribe clears his throat, and the poem is read aloud, line by line, as the peacock watches from a distance, chest puffed and tail fanned like a sentient bouquet. At the end, the koi ripple approvingly. The peacock bows once, then struts away. Historians still argue whether these poetic appeals had any real power, or were simply tolerated because the emperor liked drama. Some suggest it was a form of silent protest by overworked clerks. Others say it was simply the natural evolution of a court, so obsessed with symbolism that even birds found their voices. You file the final report under Cultural Enrichment Non-Human, and recommend a quarterly poetry contest to preempt future complaints. Back in your quarters, you find a new scroll waiting for you. It's unsigned. The handwriting is elegant. The message reads Traw. The turtle writes next. Prepare the ink. You stare at it for a long time. Then you reach for your brush. You're halfway through your morning rice when the door slams open and a breathless apprentice bursts in, hair askew, shoes untied, and a look in his eyes that screams, I just witnessed something I'll never emotionally recover from. The rhino, he gasps. He's hungry. You blink. Sir, feed him. We can't, he wails. The banana leaves are locked up. You pause mid-chew, of course. The banana leaves disbursement office. You set your bowl down with the slow, resigned dignity of someone who knows they're about to spend the next 12 hours untangling the herbivorous provisioning bureaucracy. Again, you follow the apprentice through the garden paths to the rhino enclosure, where a very large, very impatient rhinoceros is pacing in slow, angry loops. His name is Grey Thunder, and he's the only Indian rhinoceros in the Imperial Zoo. He's also been known to glare at people until they cry. At the gate, Keeper Jung greets you with a scroll in one hand and a banana leaf fan in the other. She looks frazzled. I submitted Form 13HL, herbivore leaf allocation, 3 days ago, she says. They haven't released the shipment. I've sent follow-up scrolls. I've sent fruit baskets. Nothing. He's down to bark and decorative twigs. You glance at Grey Thunder, who is now nudging a stone lantern with his horn in a way that does not feel metaphorical. One mainstream historical fact: exotic animals during the Ming Dynasty had strict and specific dietary needs, many of which were documented in obsessive detail. Certain elephants were only fed fruit harvested during full moons. Deer received hand-washed moss, and rhinos. Their diets were so particular that they required a rotating menu based on seasonal quai balance and horn polarity. But here's the quirky tidbit: the Office of Herbivorous Nourishment. Yes, that was a thing. Employed actual leaf inspectors who evaluated the quality of each banana leaf, checking for blemishes, moisture content, and spiritual alignment with the animal's assigned element. If a leaf was deemed unworthy, it was set aside for the compost pile or, more often, used in lesser animals' bedding. You march over to the Office of Herbivorous Nourishment, a squat building with precisely trimmed hedges and a very smug-looking receptionist. You state your case. The receptionist consults a scroll. Ah yes. Grey Thunder's allocation is under review. Review for what? You ask. Overconsumption, he replies. His leaf intake has exceeded the palace average. You stare at him. He's a rhinoceros. The receptionist shrugs. Rules are rules. He's received 12 bundles this month. The quota is 10. You try explaining the difference between a rhino and a goat. He nods sympathetically, then hands you Form 22AL appeal for leaf ration adjustment. You fill it out on the spot, attach Grey Thunder's dietary logs, and staple it with your personal seal. I'll need this co-signed by someone from the Bureau of Digestive Harmony, the receptionist says. You sigh. The Bureau of Digestive Harmony is located across the palace grounds, past the courtyard of celestial toilets, and shares an office with the Ministry of Imperial Flatulence, which you try not to think about. There, a clerk named Wen takes one look at your form and says, this again. This again. We've had 3 herbivore appeals this week alone. The pandas on a bamboo-only protest. The deer are claiming seasonal palate fatigue. And now the rhino. He sighs and pulls out a stamp. You people need a cookbook. With the form co-signed, stamped, and blessed with a quick incense puff, you return to the herbivorous nourishment office. The receptionist accepts the paperwork with a polite nod and says, processing will take 3 days. You blink. 3 days. Expedited processing is available, he says cheerfully, with a leaf urgency justification statement. You're handed Form 91RU. Request for urgent rhizome-based feeding. You storm back to Grey Thunder's enclosure, where Keeper Jang is now attempting to distract him with a haiku. He is not amused. You present the form. She sighs, pulls out a brush and writes, Horned hunger rises, tall bamboo dreams left unfulfilled, tall banana leaves gone. You file the haiku form appeal. Back at the office, the receptionist reads it, nods solemnly, and says, beautiful, but will still need a spiritual endorsement. A what? A monk. Preferably someone with animal empathy certification. You groan. You make a trip to the Monastery of Gentle Beasts, located just outside the palace walls. There you find Monk Ji, who agrees to bless the rhino's hunger appeal, on the condition that Grey Thunder is not harboring karmic resentment. How would I know that? You ask. Monk Ji hands you a mirror. Ask him. You return to the enclosure. Grey Thunder snorts at the mirror, then licks it. You take that as a sign of inner peace. With the monk's blessing scroll in hand, you return once more to the office of herbivorous nourishment. The receptionist sighs. All right, we'll release the emergency banana leaf bundle. You nearly fall to your knees. The leaves are delivered to the enclosure just before sunset. Grey Thunder devours them with loud, grateful crunches, pausing only once to glare at you in a way that might actually be a thank you. You file the final documentation leaf incident report, emergency feeding log, and spiritual response form 88PK for karmic. You recommend a seasonal forage budget increase and propose a new position senior leaf liaison. Historians still argue whether the Ming court's obsession with animal feeding rituals was a sign of deep compassion or just another layer of symbolic theatre. Either way, one thing is certain: if an animal was hungry, someone was going to get blamed. You return to your quarters, exhausted, covered in leaf residue, and wondering if you'll ever eat banana bread again without flinching. You fall asleep to the memory of Grey Thunder chewing slowly, rhythmically, like a living metronome of bureaucracy. You wake to the sound of hushed murmurs and the soft shuffle of silk shoes outside your quarters. That's never good. You open the door just as a scroll is being quietly slipped under it. It's sealed with a bamboo leaf and a wax stamp in the shape of a panda paw, the universal sign of an unscheduled zoo inspection. You groan. Surprise inspections mean one thing: panic, and possibly bribes, the kind wrapped in bamboo and gilt. A second scroll arrives 5 minutes later. This one bears the mark of the Office of Zoo Compliance and Containment, a department so feared that even the Emperor's favorite python once tried to fake a cold to avoid them. The message is short and terrifying. Today's inspection will include surprise audits of enclosures, feeding logs, and symbolic spiritual resonance. Bribes will be returned unless they are edible. You throw on your robe, grab your ink brush, and sprint to the main menagerie gate, where a crowd of handlers is already buzzing like bees who know the beekeeper's coming with a notebook. At the center stands Inspector Yen, a tall, severe woman in starched robes who looks like she hasn't smiled since the last dynasty. She's flanked by 2 silent scribes and a tortoise on a leash. The tortoise whispers a nearby clerk, "Is for measuring enclosure tranquility." You don't ask. One mainstream historical fact: the Ming Dynasty employed actual zoo auditors, often drawn from the ranks of retired officials or failed exam candidates with a flair for rules and a grudge against joy. They performed surprise inspections to ensure that every animal was symbolically fulfilled, physically healthy, and spiritually synchronized with its environment. But here's the quirky tidbit: a well-placed bamboo bribe, such as a dumpling tucked in a scroll or a warm bottle of plum wine disguised as herbal tonic, could, in theory, smooth over minor infractions. The trick was subtlety. Too obvious and it was rejected. Too subtle and the inspector might miss it and fine you anyway. Inspector Yan raises her hand. Today's inspection order: pandas, cranes, monkeys, and all creatures labeled potentially mystical. You mentally run through the list. The pandas are halfway through their nap cycle. The cranes are still moody from last week's poetry reading. And the monkeys? Well, the monkeys are always a problem. First stop: the panda pavilion. You arrive just ahead of the inspector to find Keeper Bao frantically trying to stuff eucalyptus into a bundle labeled festive enrichment. You raise an eyebrow. "We're out of fresh bamboo," she whispers. "This was all I could find." "Do you think they'll notice?" You both glance at the pandas, who are currently lounging like spoiled scholars, chewing slowly and side-eyeing everyone with aristocratic disdain. One of them burps. Inspector Yan arrives, sniffing the air. "Where is the bamboo sourced from?" "Mount Qingcheng," you say automatically, because that's the only answer that won't trigger an investigation. She kneels beside a panda, who lazily rolls over and presents his belly like a bribe. She frowns, checks his eyes, pokes his paw pads, and consults a tiny scroll. His QI is sluggish. You panic just slightly. "He's digesting," you offer. "We added ginseng to his snack bundle, for vibrancy." Inspector Yan nods, then turns and whispers something to the tortoise, who blinks once and continues walking. You're not sure whether this is symbolic or just weird. Next stop: the crane courtyard. You arrive to find the cranes mid-dance. An elegant, if slightly chaotic, display of wing flaps, neck stretches, and occasional honks. Mistress Lion is conducting them with a reed flute. Inspector Yan raises an eyebrow. "Is this coordinated?" "Improvised," you say. "It's part of the new emotional expression enrichment program." The Yan watches silently. One crane trips over its own leg, honks in embarrassment, and flies into a bush. You smile. They're working through some things. She makes a note on her scroll. You try to slip her a small jar of honeyed lotus seeds, wrapped in silk, labeled Crane Energy Stabilizers. She sets it aside without comment, but you notice the tortoise sniffing it approvingly. And then monkeys. You arrive at the simian sanctuary just as Subject 5 swings by on a vine and throws a sandal at your head. Inspector Yan raises an eyebrow. They're in the middle of their daily freedom of expression protocol. You say quickly. She eyes the enclosure. Several monkeys are painting with their tails. One is writing something on a wall that looks suspiciously like a haiku. Another is chewing on what appears to be last week's inspection report. Their spiritual alignment, she asks. You hesitate. Currently chaotic neutral. She frowns. That's not an official designation. You sigh. It is now. She begins inspecting the feeding logs. You wince. Some of the entries are clearly fake. One lists moonberries and some milk as a snack. Another says, "Today Subject 3 fasted for enlightenment." You distract her with a bamboo scroll containing simian meditation schedules, which just happens to be hollow and rattles suspiciously when she sets it down. The tortoise stops walking. Inspector Yan frowns. It's sensing something. You hold your breath. Then Subject 5 somersaults across the enclosure, lands in front of the tortoise, and hands it a flower. The tortoise blinks. Inspector Yan makes a note. High potential for cross-species diplomacy. You exhale. Finally, the last stop. The mystical creature's enclosure, which is mostly empty aside from a very old goat with a birthmark that looks vaguely like a phoenix and a peacock who insists he once saw a unicorn in a dream. Inspector Yan gazes around the quiet courtyard, then turns to you. Where is the spiritual focus point? You gesture to a rock in the center of the courtyard. There. She walks to it, kneels, and places a hand on its surface. It's warm. You nod. Symbolic heat. It represents the lingering presence of unseen beasts. She looks at you. You look at the tortoise. The tortoise blinks. She stands. Inspection complete. You walk her back to the gate, heart pounding, hands still ink-stained from forged feeding logs. Just before she leaves, she hands you a folded scroll. For next time, she says. You open it later in your quarters. It's not a warning. It's a recipe. For bamboo dumplings. You smile, light a candle, and write your inspection summary. All creatures accounted for. All koi in acceptable ranges. One tortoise promoted to honorary inspector. You fall asleep as the tortoise's slow footsteps echo in your dreams, one quiet plod at a time. You're jolted awake by a knock you recognize all too well. Slow, deliberate, and with the kind of authority that suggests whatever's behind the door comes with a scroll. You crack it open and there stands Archivist Shu, her expression unreadable, her hands folded neatly over a small black lacquer box. It's time, she says. You frown. Time for what? She opens the box just enough for you to see what's inside, a permit expiration seal, inked and ready. The tiger's license has lapsed. You stare at her. You mean Jade Fang? She nods. He's out of compliance. You sit down slowly, the weight of those words settling in like fog. Jade Fang, the majestic tiger from Guangxi, symbol of southern loyalty, guardian of the imperial threshold, has officially reached the end of his bureaucratic lifespan. Not his actual life, of course. Just the paperwork authorizing his existence inside the Forbidden City. And that's almost worse. You dress quickly and follow Shu across the palace grounds to the records of Animal Tenure Hall, where a small group of officials has already gathered. The room is quiet, the air still, and the mood ceremonial. One mainstream historical fact: all animals within the Ming Imperial Zoo were granted temporary permits, even those considered permanent residents. These permits were reviewed every 3 years, and if not renewed, the creature's legal presence in the palace expired. This was meant to ensure that every animal continued to serve a symbolic, political, or spiritual function, and to prevent overcrowding, which, in imperial terms, meant too many cranes. But here's the quirky tidbit: expired permits didn't just disappear. They were ritually retired. The animal's name would be transferred to a scroll titled Features of Service Past, and a ceremonial decision had to be made: renew the permit, release the creature, or, if neither was possible, assign it an honorable symbolic death. Even if the animal was alive and well, it could be declared spiritually concluded. You arrive at the tiger enclosure to find Jade Fang lounging in the sun, tail swishing lazily, completely unaware that his bureaucratic fate is hanging in the balance. Keeper Zhao is already there, eyes red-rimmed, clutching a feeding bowl like it's a sacred relic. He's healthy, she says quietly, still sharp, still strong. But the paperwork, you open the tiger's file, it's thick. His original permit, his tribute documentation, astrological alignment charts, feeding logs, poetry evaluations, symbolic resonance scores, it's all there. But the problem is simple. His symbolic relevance has been called into question. The Emperor's interest has shifted, Shu says. He's favoring phoenixes now. And dear, there's talk of a gentler court aesthetic. You glance at Jade Fang, who is currently chewing on a beef bone with the slow satisfaction of a creature who doesn't care about court trends. The decision falls to you. As the keeper of his file, you must prepare the paperwork for one of 3 outcomes. 1. Renewal requires astrological consultation, ministerial approval, and a new poetic justification. 2. Release almost impossible. There's nowhere to send him that won't cause political offense or paperwork riots. 3. Symbolic conclusion, a euphemism for, we pretend he died and archive his file with honors. You stare at the scroll for a long moment. Then you ask for time. You spend the rest of the day gathering materials for a renewal request. You draft a new poem, titled The Silent Roar That Guards the Gate. You consult with the astrologers, who confirm that Jade Fang's birth hour aligns with the Emperor's lucky star this month. You even convince the Ministry of Rights to back your claim that tigers still have spiritual value, especially during tax season. But just as you're preparing to submit the renewal scroll, a messenger arrives with a final blow. The Emperor has issued a decree. He says, no new tiger permits. Shift in symbolic focus. You're stunned. Effective immediately. The messenger nods. He wants to phase out ferocity as a court motif. Too much growling. Not enough grace. You feel the weight of it settle into your bones. It's over. Back at the enclosure, you find Jade Fang padding silently through the grass, regal as ever. You sit with him for a while, outside the fence, watching him lounge beneath the peach tree. You whisper the poem you wrote. He doesn't respond. But he doesn't growl either. You return to the records hall and begin the final paperwork. Form 99TX, termination of zoological tenure, high symbolic rank, you fill in every box. Reason for termination, shift in imperial symbolism. Current condition healthy, alert, deeply uninterested in bureaucracy. Final status spiritually concluded with honors. You attach the poem, the feeding log, and a final sketch of Jade Fang drawn by a palace artist who once saw him yawn and weep for 20 minutes. You seal the scroll. Shu adds it to the scroll of departed creatures, slotting it between a melancholy yak and a rooster who once predicted an eclipse. And just like that, Jade Fang is gone. Not physically. He's still in the enclosure, still breathing, still licking his paws. But on paper, in the eyes of the Empire, he no longer exists. He's a memory, a record, a creature of service past. As per tradition, you're required to perform the final acknowledgement ritual. A silent walk past his enclosure exactly at twilight, one hand over your heart, one holding the scroll that now bears his name in red ink. You do it. The sky is golden, the wind is still. Jade Fang watches you go with eyes like molten amber. You return to your quarters and place a single tiger whisker on your desk. It's all that remains of his file, the rest now sealed away in the archive. Historians still argue whether symbolic deaths like Jade Fang's were a form of mercy or erasure. Some say it was a way to preserve dignity for creatures no longer in favor. Others say it was just a polite way to make room for more deer. You lie back on your mat, eyes open, heart heavy. The tiger is gone, but in your dreams he still walks, silent, proud, and utterly uninterested in anyone's paperwork. The morning after Jade Fang's bureaucratic burial is quieter than usual. No summons, no scrolls, no peacocks demanding artistic compensation or monkeys flinging metaphorical and non-metaphorical shade. For a moment, you wonder if perhaps the Empire has finally settled into some sort of peaceful, permit-approved balance. But of course, that fantasy lasts about as long as a crane's attention span. A runner appears just before breakfast, out of breath and clutching a sealed scroll bearing the black ribbon of final review, a rare marker reserved for the closure of high-ranking animal files. You already know what it contains. It's time to process Jade Fang's archival record. You're summoned to the Department of Zoological Closure, a shadowy wing of the palace archives where animals go when they're no longer present, but still symbolically active. The hallway is lined with scroll racks, incense burners, and a surprisingly large number of cat statues. You assume they're decorative. You hope they're decorative. At the center of the chamber sits a large desk, behind which looms Grand Archivist Shen, an elderly man with eyebrows like snowdrifts and the memory of a quartz elephant. "You've brought the record," he says without looking up. You nod and hand over Jade Fang's final scroll, complete with poetic eulogy, temperament logs, and a watercolor sketch of him mid-yawn. "Very well," Shen intones. "We'll begin the final paper trail. Here's your mainstream historical fact: the Ming Dynasty didn't just keep records of living animals. They created multi-volume dossiers for each creature that lived, died, or was symbolically concluded in the imperial zoo. These files were indexed, cross-referenced, and sometimes even ritually read aloud during seasonal festivals to honor the departed beasts of service. But here's the odd, delightful tidbit. Certain animals, particularly those with high symbolic rank, were given posthumous titles, just like imperial concubines or ministers. A particularly well-behaved crane might be named Feathered Emissary of Tranquility. A loyal elephant could become Pillar of Earthly Patience. So naturally, Jade Fang needs a title. You and Shen review the options. The palace's posthumous animal nomenclature guide includes such gems as Silent Roar of the Southern Watch, Stripe Bearer of Balanced Ferocity, Guardian of Thunderous Grace, Symbol of Stare-Down Diplomacy. You choose carefully, finally settling on I. Spirit Fang, Watcher of Waning Power. Shen raises an eyebrow. A little melancholic. You shrug. He was a tiger with an existential gaze. Approved. You transcribe the title onto the archive of departed beasts, a scroll so long it's stored on a custom-built roller. Jade Fang's name joins a list of imperial giraffes, prophetic parrots, and a famously surly goose who once bit a general and was later named Feathered Defender of the Eastern Gate. Next comes the symbolic redistribution protocol. This is the part where the spiritual weight of the tiger must be transferred elsewhere to maintain cosmic equilibrium. You're handed a form, Redistribution of essence, form 114 TG, and asked to select a new animal to inherit Jade Fang's symbolic role. You're given 3 candidates. 1. A red fox recently promoted from garden intruder to clever omen. 2. A crane whose call mimics a human sigh. 3. A tortoise who's outlived 3 handlers and now refuses to move unless bribed. You pick the fox. Something about the eyes. Something sly, knowing. The Empire needs a new watcher from the shadows. You process the transfer. Jade Fang's essence, his symbolic identity, is now partially vested in Fox No 2, who will receive a new enclosure, a ceremonial perch, and a scroll of behavioral expectations. You file the final paperwork. Shen stamps each scroll with a seal shaped like a paw print wrapped in wind. It's done, he says at last, with the gravity of someone who's closed more animal files than most people have taken breaths. You bow, collect your things, and exit the archive. Outside, the air is still. The trees sway gently. Somewhere far off, a fox lets out a single, sharp bark. You smile faintly. Historians still argue about the necessity of the final paper trail. Some say it was a way to maintain continuity in the imperial cosmos. Others believe it was simply the Ming court's way of avoiding existential panic, by pretending that even tigers had neat endings. But you know the truth. There are no neat endings. Only scrolls. You return to your quarters, where a new scroll is waiting for you, of course. It's tied with a green ribbon and smells faintly of seaweed. You unroll it. Notice, the Emperor has acquired a jellyfish. Please prepare the necessary permits. You stare at the message. You put down the scroll. You lie on your mat, and you laugh, quietly, for a long time until your ribs ache and your mind drifts.